All right, let's jump right in. Lake 42, the Great Confluence. I mean, what does that even sound like to you? Kind of like an epic fantasy novel, right? But what we're actually looking at here is a map. A map for a truly incredible intellectual and creative journey.
And this gorgeous image? This is our central metaphor. We're not just looking at some pretty landscape. No. Think of this as a visual for how all these different ideas, projects, and, even whole books can flow together to create something, well, something totally new and profound.
So that's the big question, right? Lake 42. It's a pretty strange and specific title. What's this lake all about, and what's with the number 42? Well, stick with me, because that's exactly the mystery we're going to unpack.
All right, so let's get into it. What is Lake 42? It's way more than just a name. It's like a destination, a conceptual one, for a huge body of work.
Basically, Lake 42 is this powerful metaphor for what happened at the end of a super productive 6-year journey. We're talking about one author who created this massive system of interconnected ideas, and they all flow into this one single conceptual lake.
But you can't understand the lake, right, without understanding the rivers and streams that are feeding it. And in this case, we're talking about a literal waterfall of books.
And here it is. This is the waterfall. I know, at first glance it looks, well, incredibly complex, but try to think of it like a mind map for a creative journey. Every single one of those little squares, that's a potential book, over 42 of them. And the lines, they show how one idea just flowed into the next over 6 years. Now, we're not going to try and decode this whole thing right now, but it just gives you this incredible sense of the scale, the sheer interconnectedness of it all. It's honestly a breathtaking look inside a creative process.
Okay, so let's talk about the number. Why 42? I know what you're thinking. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? The answer to the ultimate question. And yeah, that's a fun little nod, but here it has a much more specific meaning. It actually marks the completion of the author's 42nd manuscript. And get this, it was a milestone that connected all the way back to his very first book. It created a complete intellectual circle. How cool is that?
So how do you even begin to read that crazy map? Well, it's actually simpler than it looks. You've got two main things to watch for. The red lines, those show a direct connection. One book's ideas are literally built on by the next one. The blue lines, on the other hand, are a bit looser, more of an indirect, thematic connection. It just shows how all these different streams of thought are still part of the same big intellectual ecosystem.
And all these connections, they all lead to one place. This is where we get to the core idea of the whole thing, the Great Confluence. It is the exact point where all those individual streams and rivers of thought, they finally meet.
The author has a specific name for this pattern, Generative Confluence. Now pay attention here, because this is not just about mashing ideas together. It's a really specific process where totally separate lines of thought, I'm talking things as different as ecological psychology and project management theory, they come together and spark something brand new, a whole new enterprise. But, and this is the key part, without destroying the original ideas.
And this comparison just illustrates the difference perfectly. Think about a real river, right? When two streams merge, poof, they become one. They lose their old identities. But in a generative confluence, the original streams of thought actually keep going on their own paths, while at the same time feeding this new central body of work, our lake. It's a creative and, not a destructive or. I love that.
So the really crucial thing to get here is that this wasn't just some abstract theory. No, this was a real-life practice. For 6 months, the author deliberately lived out this entire process in 5 stages. He started by finding the coordinate, that point of intersection, then anchoring the center, scaling the focus, completing the platform, and finally revealing the whole incredible landscape he'd built.
And this brings us to what I think is a truly fascinating part of this whole thing. All of these super complex ideas, they're structured and made, understandable through these really powerful metaphors pulled straight from nature.
Just take this, for example. See the bridge on this book cover? That is not just a pretty picture. It becomes a real, practical framework. It's a model for figuring out how to connect two things that seem totally separate, like a huge abstract theory and a messy, real-world problem, across that conceptual gap.
Or how about this one? A tree becomes the entire structure for a meta-framework called ecological formism. So the core idea is the seed. That seed grows into a trunk of core principles, which then branch out into all these different applications, all while being part of a bigger forest of knowledge. It's a beautifully intuitive way to organize something that's really complex.
So you might be asking,
where do all these powerful nature metaphors even come from? Well, for the author, they're not just some clever tools he picked up. No, they're rooted in a deeply personal, lived experience.
This quote from Lin Zexu, a 19th century Chinese official, apparently became a personal motto for him, and it just perfectly captures the spirit of this work. The sea embraces all rivers. Its vastness comes from its openness. I mean, wow. Knowledge, just like a sea, grows vast by being open to all the different rivers that flow into it.
And there's a really powerful reason why that quote resonated so deeply. As a young man, the author's own life literally followed the path of the Min River in China. He grew up way up in the mountains, near its source. Then, he moved downstream for his education in the city of Fuzhou, which is right where the river meets the sea. So by traveling up and down this river system his whole life, he physically experienced the ideas of flow and confluence and growth. These are the very concepts that would become the foundation for his life's work. It's like the river itself was his first teacher.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got a waterfall of books, a generative confluence of ideas, all these amazing metaphors from nature. So what's the one thing, the one practice that ties it all together? Well, it all comes down to a single powerful act: curation. And there you have it. The ultimate theme, the big idea behind this entire 6-year journey, is what he calls creative life curation. It is the conscious, deliberate act of shaping your own work and your own life.
So what does that actually mean? Well, think of it as both an art and a science. It's about taking all the different scattered parts of your life, your personal history, the knowledge you pick up, the projects you work on, and intentionally weaving them all together to form a meaningful whole. The goal? To create really significant achievements.
So here's the final takeaway. That whole waterfall of 42 books, the mapping of all their connections, the development of that generative confluence model, even the use of all those nature metaphors, every single piece of it. These are all deliberate acts of creative curation. That's how the streams were guided into the lake. It wasn't an accident.
And that leaves us with one last, kind of provocative thought. This whole framework, it's not just some academic exercise, right? It's a model, and it kind of forces us to ask ourselves, if we look at the streams of our own lives, our careers, our hobbies, our relationships, where is our confluence? What is the lake where all the unique parts of our own story can flow together and create something truly meaningful?